Okay, now you can tell me.
Yeah, so I clicked away from. I was watching a YouTube video or something like that, and I clicked the window closed, and four of the links on my desktop were missing, and they were all Toho links. So I got a little angry at my computer. It took me a while to figure out what they were. I had to go through and check out all my GOG links, all my Steam stuff, make sure that none of that was missing. And I'm like, no, it's this. It's Toho 7, Toho 8, and the Toho must be 6 and 7 visual novels. And they were all, like, the links just vanished.
Did,
And I looked it up, and it looks like Windows 7 decide if Windows 7 finds four or more broken links on the desktop, it deletes all of them. But the links aren't broken, so I was very confused. It must have thought they were broken for some reason, maybe because they have a square bracket in the file name. I don't know.
did you try growling at your computer?
I did. It didn't work.
Yeah, it's still worth doing that.
Well, it wasn't really a growl. I guess it was more like a grumble, or like a string of obscenities, something like that.
Well, it's probably too late now, but next time try.
Well, I
try to
fixed the
growl.
problem. Believe you me. As soon as I figured out what links were missing, I replaced them.
It's like roll up a newspaper and hit the computer. This is where they belong. Bad.
This is where these links belong. If you ever remove anything Toho from my desktop again, you're going in the garbage.
It's not the computer's fault. It's Windows' fault.
The only way that this computer would be able to have these programs on it is if it were a Windows computer. So it's not really Windows' fault per se. It's the computer's hard drive's fault for letting Windows delete things off of itself without my permission.
All right, I'll accept that. The computer has been relegated to the task of some kind of internal caretaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of its own self. I mean, I'm not being too unreasonable here, I think.
No, not at all. No.
So
Demanding
you
that your
wanted to
computer
talk...
doesn't do what the software tells it to is certainly not unreasonable.
Yes. So you wanted to talk about Etrian Odyssey, the
Yes,
new one,
yes.
Etrian Odyssey Nexus, possibly the greatest Odyssey to have ever occurred in human experience, which, with apologies to the great Abe.
Well, I mean, it's combined. They certainly are the greatest Odyssey ever to have occurred. I wouldn't say this is the best one, but there are no bad Etrian games. This is just
But
anyone that plays Etrian is well aware of this, and it's another new take. They did the first two were basically played the same. They added like one little thing to the second one that kind of changed it up, and the classes weren't exactly the same.
right.
But then the third game, they went off the rails, kind of changing it. Like the mapping and gameplay and dungeon crawling was basically the same, but they added a secondary map where you were on a boat and you had to solve all these puzzles to complete the map, and you could only go so far as you progressed in the game, and when you did, it would open up new areas for you to go back to the main map and get through things. And then they also reworked how all the skills worked in the third game.
Right.
They were all new classes. None of the classes were the same from the older games. And they kind of changed it up how, like in the first game, every single skill had 10 points that you could put into it.
Right.
And it was fun and it worked just fine, but there were a lot of, it being the first game, there were a lot of things that were overlooked and maybe weren't thought of. The formula hadn't reached any kind of perfection.
Sure.
So the like say the Protector had a taunt skill that was supposed to attract the enemies to him, and it didn't really work. Like there was a bug with that skill, so it was kind of a useless skill all around. I had heard that it worked if you combined it with another character using a cloaking skill. But I never confirmed that for myself. All I know is that the provoke skill didn't really seem to work in the game. And then, there were like the gathering skills all had 10 level point. You basically earn a point every time you gain a level that you can put into skills.
Right.
And like all the mining and chopping and taking skills that let you gather items that you could sell to create new items. You could put 10 points into those alone, meaning that you kind of had to divide up your teams. It's a wizardry kind of game, so there's more classes than you can fit in your party, so you can make multiple characters and put together different parties.
Right.
And in the first game, you had to manually change them each time you wanted to swap them out. I think you had to do that from the first to the third game. And then in the fourth game, they finally realized, oh, wait, what if we let you save certain squads of characters? In the fourth game, you could save 3, and in the fifth game, you could too. And then when it got to this new one, Nexus lets you actually save, I think, 6 or 7.
Nice.
So it's, and probably because I don't know if every character...
Well, there's a ridiculous number of classes in Nexus, right?
I'm not sure anymore. When I first heard about it, they were saying that every class was in the game. I think I might have misread that. I think what it is they took a lot of classes from all the other games and put them in this game.
Well, I flipped through the art book, and like it's a 32-page art book, and the first like 6 or 7 pages are dedicated to like some like pictures of like Yggdrasil and stuff like that. But then after that, it's just class after class after class after class after class. So there's probably at least 12 classes.
Yeah, there's more classes to start in this game than any of the other games, and only one of them I think isn't from an older game. The hero class is the new class for this game. I haven't looked into if any of the unlockable classes are new ones or not, but they do give you more to start with in this one, and they're taken from all of the games 1 through 5.
Yeah.
And I believe that you unlock some of the other classic ones, but I'm not sure that they have all of them in the game like I previously thought. I think what it was is you can actually, while you're making your character, you get the option to use any of the images of any of the character classes from the older games. So like you can make a medic, but you could give it the let's see, what's a character that's not in the game so far? You could give it the arbalist's photo. Okay. So that's pretty cool still, because there were a lot of images for the characters, and then I think I don't know if 4 did this as much. I can't remember because it's been a while since I played it, but 5 in this game let you manipulate like the hair colors and the voices for the characters a lot, and the skin colors.
Yeah.
So you get a little bit more customizable options, and I went through when I made one of each class and put them all on reserve so I could mess around with them, and they all seemed to have some pretty good looks to them. I made a shogun with red hair because they had an image of one with like one of the snaggletooths. Mm-hmm. And I called her Satania. I gave her the goofiest voice I could find. It's great. There's one of the voices in the game. I forget which one. It's, but it's a lot of the things that they say are in English, but like with a heavy Japanese accent, and it's a really like, it's basically a Satania voice. So like every time you heal this character, she'll shout out "Sankyu" and all these other things in these weird voices. Lots of English speaking. There's some nice touches to the game that make it really fun to go through, see what you can do with the different characters. But building up to it, the first 3 games, when it hit that third game, that's when they started saying, okay, well, what if this skill is only like 1 to 5 points that you have to put in it? So you had a lot more options of, like they put a farmer class in the game, and you could put 5 points into their gathering skill.
Yeah.
But theirs would actually do all 3 types of gathering, so you could get 15 different items with just 5 points, as opposed to a full 15 points for each gather.
Oh, yeah.
And they changed that all up in 4, 5, and 6, where they made it, you just put 1 point in, and it gives you a boost whenever you go to a gathering point. So you didn't need any points if you didn't want to, but it was beneficial, and it was only 1 point you would have to spend.
Yeah.
On the plus side, it made it easy. It's just like, okay, I'll spend the point and not worry about it. On the downside, making your choices easier at that point kind of detracted from the fun of being a very fickle person that wants to try everything.
Yeah.
Not much, but it was still there. I think, actually, this particular incarnation of Etrian, for as much as is in it, it has the least amount of wiggle room to play with the characters, at least starting. I've only hit level 10 with most of the characters.
Okay.
And they did the same thing that they did with 4, I believe, where you've got 3 different levels of skills. You've got beginner, novice, and master.
Right.
So you can't access the novice.
You mean like the skill tiers, right?
Yeah, you can't access the novice and master until you hit level 20, I think.
I see.
So you're just stuck with the beginner skills. And
can you at least look at them?
yeah, you can look at all of them.
Okay.
So you can plan ahead, but the point is, like, say take Etrian 5, you could play the pugilist in several different ways. One of them was a straight up attack character, not really TP intensive, TP being the magic points.
Right.
You could focus on passive physical skills and have a nice powerful frontline character. But they were also the character that used the bind skills, and just for reference, the bind skills, you can there's several classes in all the Etrian games that get these skills that can bind enemy arms, legs, and heads. And depending on what the enemy will attack you with, it's basically a defensive way to protect your characters. The pugilist has all three of them. It's the binding class for that game, and you can choose to be a powerful frontline attacker or a binder or some kind of like half-breed mix that's slightly weaker in both areas but can still do it. Mm-hmm. And in this game, it seems like all of the novice skills at the very beginning of the game, you have access to all of the binds right away. But the other novice skills aren't really attack boosts or anything. They're just complementary skills for the binds.
Yeah.
And that was something, they actually got away from that in, I believe, Etrian 4. They stopped making it so you could even get skills that were useless to you unless you had points in other skills. Here you can put points into skills that you didn't necessarily have yet because of how it was arranged.
Yeah.
Which isn't
so from my experience in 1 and 2, it was mostly that like there were skills that you could get that you couldn't use to their full potential unless you built up another skill first. And then there was always like prerequisites for certain skills. Like for this skill you need 6 points in this other skill first or something like that, which is kind of how they worked on that. But starting in 4, I remember there was a lot of this skill is a specific upgrade for this other skill, which causes it to do fire damage now or something.
Yeah. Now, in this particular one, like you could actually put points into a skill, and unless you had put points in a different skill, it did nothing. So, it was that was kind of weird. I think there were 1 or 2 like that in 5, but it seems like there's a handful in this game.
Huh.
I mean, that's no big deal. But the point was, if you actually look at those skills, you kind of have to look at it and be like, oh, well, the only thing you can really do with this character in the beginning is these bind skills.
Right.
And usually, like, the only characters in the previous games I can really think of that gave you only one option were the healers. And that was like the medics in the first 2 games were the only ones that basically had only that role. Because 3, they rolled out the
princess.
No, the monk. The monk, you could be an attacker or a healer or a combination of the 2.
Oh.
And the princess, likewise,
had passive healing stuff.
Yeah, had passive healing, but the monk was more the main healer of that game.
I see.
Not necessarily. I mean, I did most of the game without one, but but as far as just straight up having a healing spell, they were the ones. So, I mean, and that's not really taking anything away from the game. The game is great. Etrian Odyssey Nexus is... it's the first game in a while that's got me to sit down for 6 hours straight and play a video game.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so the dungeons are kind of like they were in 4, where you had to go to different areas to explore different dungeons. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily all of them had staircases to another level, but some of them do. There's like side dungeons with extra stuff you can do.
Yeah, and some of the side dungeons only have 1 floor, and some have maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I definitely understand why they did it in this game the way they did, because they wanted to get a good mix of they did a lot of classic dungeons from the older games, or at least things that looked similar, and they brought a lot of the puzzles from the older games back. Early on in this game, you run into the bears from the 4th Etrian Odyssey. that the puzzle with them was you had to get them to follow you, and when you would come
And knock down the trees.
they would knock down the stumps. They redid
Yeah.
that pretty early in this game.
Yeah, well, that was pretty early in 4 too.
I don't think the maps are an exact match, but they made the aesthetic of them look the same as the older games.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting how they did it. Another thing that I noticed about this game is that like everyone and their mother has some kind of way to heal, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Like it hasn't really seemed so far like it can break the game, but I'm pretty sure every Etrian game in some way can be broken by certain characters. Everyone always finds a way to do it.
Sure.
There's just going to be combinations that work better than others. This particular one though, like I have a team. Of course I had to try the hero class, so I threw one of them in, and their thing seems to be you remember in Etrian 3 when they introduced, you've got 5 characters, but there's an extra slot that something could be in, and that was for the ninja could summon a clone of itself, the Yggdroid could summon little bots that it could use as weapons, and
Yeah.
the beast.
And there was a summoner that summoned Beastmaster or something like that.
Yeah, they summoned different beasts that you could use in that slot.
Yeah.
So the hero class, they get a skill that has a chance to, when you use certain skills, it will create an afterimage in that slot.
Okay.
And it will repeat that skill. It took me a minute to figure out the mechanic that it goes by, but basically it's for things like, it reduces the TP cost because you're getting the same attack twice in a row without spending anything.
Oh, okay.
And there's a defensive attack skill where it slows your character down, and until you attack, your party has higher defense. So it's useful to be able to use that, summon the afterimage, and then the afterimage repeats that the next round to save you some TP and continue the defensive posture.
Right.
And also they get a passive heal whenever they use a skill. So you can kind of keep the party going, being healed, because the afterimage will also get that passive heal when it uses its skill. And the afterimage only lasts 1 round, and then it disappears, and then you have to wait until it, you get a chance for it to happen again.
Right.
And of course there's skills that boost that chance. I think all of the Etrian games had a variation on the party skills. In the first game, each character had a little meter that would build up, and once it was full, you had a boost skill, which would basically overpower your next attack or heal.
Yeah, that's right.
The second game, each character class, they still had the boost meter, but instead each character class had a specific thing that it would do.
Yeah, right.
The third game was, that's when they introduced these slots that you could equip each character, where like a skill might need 3 characters to use it, so you would equip 3 characters with this skill, and if any of them filled their meter, you would be able to use it.
Right.
The fourth game, I think the fourth game did something similar.
The fourth game had party skills that anybody could use, and there was a common meter for the whole party.
Yeah, the Unity skills. And the fifth game did that too.
You're right.
This game has more like... the fifth game had more of a... what were they called? I can't remember. I think it was called Unity, but it kind of did the same thing, except you would actually pick your skills from... 5 was the only one that had a... class skill tree as well as a race skill tree, so you could have like a variation on what race your character was in that game. Only one that you could do that in. And the race class tree had these Unity skill selections. You could pick a skill that basically it would be your character's skill, but it would require a certain number of people to also use their meter to use it. Your character was the only one that would have to have their meter full, but if you did use it, whatever anyone else had, it would drain their meter.
Right.
Now this one, they give you, again, each character class has their own specific thing that happens when their meter's full. And it's not a meter anymore. You get to use it once per day. So unless you're out for a very long time or you go back to town a lot, you kind of have to be careful when you use it, like it's an emergency thing.
Yeah.
And then there's a secondary boost skill that I haven't been able to use yet. I don't know if it unlocks at a higher level or what. I don't know what the deal is with that yet.
Yeah.
It might be a one-time use. It might be some kind of boost thing, but we'll see when we get there. So there's a lot going on in this one that is interesting. The world map, there's no longer any. Like I was saying, with 3 and 4 both had an external map that you could explore.
Mm-hmm.
3 had the pirate puzzle-solving water map, and
Right.
4 had a world map that was like one of the dungeon maps where you had to map it out.
Right.
Except it led you to the other dungeons, so you would be flying around an airship looking for other dungeons to visit.
Yeah. Right.
Now this one, they basically just made an overworld map, and they put icons pop up as you progress in the game that kind of point you where to go next, and then extra stuff will pop up here and there, and
Sure.
you just tap it with the stylus or select it with the cursor, and you go right there. A little bit different, kind of neat. I don't know if I can't really say it adds or detracts anything. But it's I guess they always like to be doing something new in those games, which I appreciate. So whether you love it or hate it, it was definitely something new.
Well, I mean, they're always tinkering with their formula. So
Yeah, it is the most enjoyable series that I have kept up with in my adult life. And I hope it continues onto the Switch, because they said this is going to be the last one on the 3DS.
Yep.
The first 3 were on the DS, the 4th, 5th, and this one, and the 2 remakes were on
and Mystery Dungeon.
3DS. Yeah, and Mystery Dungeon. Mystery Dungeon's in a class of its own. It's
the best roguelike I've ever played.
It really is. You get a party of 4 that you can swap
Yep.
between as you choose. You can set a whole bunch of strategy commands so they act on their own, or you can control them individually.
Yeah,
it's
incredibly polished for a roguelike.
Yeah, there's just so much to it. It's unbelievable. Just setting up your extra teams as defensive units to prevent monsters from breaking into the lower parts of the dungeons, and
the towns and stuff. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, building up the town too. That's kind of fun, where you gather
Mm-hmm.
resources and money to improve things in town, and that in turn improves your own
Ability
skills.
to dungeon crawl. Yeah.
And the boss fights are very interesting. They basically, when you come to a boss fight in Etrian Mystery Dungeon, it almost turns into a JRPG menu-driven boss fight where all 4 of your characters kind of spread out. And
Oh, right.
yeah, and
I
you
remember that.
face
yeah.
the.
It's been a long time since I played that game.
Yeah, it's really cool. That is the easily the best roguelike I've ever played, and I love roguelikes.
Yeah, I'm not as big a roguelike fan as you are, but I can recognize solid gold when I see it.
So this is definitely a good Etrian, though.
There hasn't been a bad one.
There really hasn't. I mean, I think 3 or 4 might be my favorite, and those would probably be closely followed by the remakes of 1 and 2. The remakes of 1 and 2 were a bit different because they took the first and second game and they decided to give you the option of playing the classic game with the upgraded skills and character classes that they had reworked for these games.
Or you could play an actual story that they wrote with like new content and stuff.
Yeah,
that wasn't in the originals.
Yeah, with actual characters that they give you to run through the game with. And the character portion is great. Like, I haven't even tried the classic part on either of them because I haven't finished the character one. These are long games, obviously.
Yeah, they're dungeon crawlers. They're wizardry style dungeon crawlers, so you can easily while away 100 hours on them.
And it's so much fun to do. Etrian Odyssey 3 might be the game that I've spent more time on than any other game short of Diablo 2.
Yep.
And I have consistently played Diablo 2 at least once a year for the past 20 years since it came out. Let's see. Nexus is Oh yeah, the first two remakes, the remakes of the first two, they they also added extra dungeons to those. Like
Yeah, yeah, of course.
as you progress,
That's what I mean. In order to make the story work, they had to add some stuff. So that was definitely a thing.
it was kind of neat how they did it too, because like there was the main dungeon that you played in the original game, but then they tacked on these other dungeons that you would go visit, and it was kind of like
Yeah.
3 again, where you had to visit them to progress the story before you could continue in the main dungeon.
Right, right.
So that was, and they're huge dungeons too. I think.
Well, they're decently sized.
Well, I think the 1 and 2 remakes are bigger than any of the dungeons in 4, 5, and Nexus so far. I mean,
Really?
they're just huge
Well,
to map out.
No, I mean the thing with Etrian is that all the levels are approximately the same size. They have like a 30 by 30 block, A B C D E F.
About, yeah.
Yeah, 30 by 30 block, and then you just gotta count them up. So
But I don't mean size-wise. I mean they're like huge to explore, like all the puzzles and everything you have to solve to get around the.
yeah,
They crammed a whole bunch of stuff in the remakes.
no, I mean I think that the dungeon crawler that has the record for like largest dungeons is probably Mary Skelter.
Yeah, you were telling me about that. I still haven't cracked that one open yet, but
You really need to. It's really ridiculous. Like the first like say 10 levels or so are just kind of standard 20 by 20, 30 by 30 kind of things. But then you just start getting into these areas where it's like 40 by 40 or 60 by 60, and like the levels are just huge. And they're full of like all kinds of traps and stuff to play around with and secrets to find. And all your characters have like specific special abilities which allow you to open up certain things, and if you like forget about them, you can really get screwed over. It's pretty cool.
I actually went to play it the other day. I don't remember where I put it. My copy is hiding somewhere.
Didn't you buy one of those special edition copies?
No, I just bought the game used at like a GameStop.
Oh, I did that, and then I bought the special edition because it was that good.
Well, I may end up doing that. I'll track one down, but I want to play the
They're
game
probably
first.
not that hard to find.
Yeah, the dungeon crawlers on Vita are excellent.
Well, that's all Experience Inc., and they kind of make a slightly different style of stuff, but it's good too.
Yeah,
Their crawlers are a little bit more grindy.
yeah they're a
general.
bit more wizardry-like too.
They're a little harder, little more gimmicky.
Less skill focused too. I really like the focus on skills in Etrian, that kind of
Oh no! They're quite skill focused. It's just that there's not a very large
variation.
variety of skills.
You don't,
It's like you have like 2 or 3 skills that you're going to use every turn, pretty much.
yeah, and you don't really build them up yourself. You kind of feel more invested in your characters in Etrian.
Oh yeah.
Although I will say the Experience Inc. ones, customizing your gear is probably more interesting in that game.
Yeah, the problem with the Experience Inc. ones is that there's kind of nothing for you to buy once you get the basic equipment. It's like everything that you get is going to be found in the dungeons for the most part.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, you get all this money and there's not much to do with it other than to turn it into experience points. It's like, what's the point? Whereas in Etrian, there's the really nice mechanic of bringing back enemy materials, and then those get made into your new weapons. Like that's a really good mechanic.
Yeah. Oh, and they really improved though that starting with Etrian 3, they introduced forging where you could tack on attributes to your weapons.
Oh yeah, they have that in 4 too. It's pretty cool.
And then in the 5th one and this one, you can actually upgrade your weapons to get them like +5 and everything. And then when you get to a certain level, you can recycle them into materials that you can use to upgrade your next weapon.
Okay.
I think that's how it worked in 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nexus uses that same system.
Yeah, like the Experience Inc. ones, a lot of the, except for like the first couple of them, all of them now have like this run through the battle extremely quickly option, which you kind of need for those games. Whereas in Etrian, you don't ever want to necessarily do that. There's too much you have to play around with from round to round.
Well, especially in this new one, like I was telling you before we sat down for this call,
Mm-hmm.
this one is a lot more magic point based than the other ones were. So in a lot of the other games, maybe 5 being the exception, you could have a good front line of characters that just had passive skills. So you didn't have to worry about their technique points being used up.
Yeah.
And you could, of course, you wouldn't be as powerful, but you would be stable. And this game, they kind of boosted every character class's technique points.
Yeah.
But they took away a lot of
the passive skills.
Yeah, I don't think until you get to the novice level with a Ronin, you don't get a physical attack boost.
Oh, that's a little weird.
And they actually did a pretty good job reworking a lot of the skills, though. Like, I guess the way that they're handling not being able to put every class in the game is they combined a lot of the skills that certain classes from other games had into the classes they were putting into this game. And they changed a few things up with the characters that were already in the game. The one that they didn't is, I believe, the gunner has been the most consistent character across all the games. Because they basically had the same skills with slightly different variations on how they worked in 2, Mystery Dungeon, the remake of 2, and this new game.
Yeah.
They have a medic bullet, shoot your friends and heal them.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was in the original, but you can still hang out in the back line, and if your gunner uses defend, it can heal your party.
Oh, interesting.
They introduced that in Mystery Dungeon, in the remake of 2. I don't think that was it. Yeah.
Well, there was no back rank in Mystery Dungeon.
I think you still had the medic bullet, though. I think you could still shoot.
Oh yeah. They still had medic bullets and stuff. It's just that there wasn't any frontline or backline because it was a roguelike.
But yeah, everything is. A lot of the passive skills, they kind of shorten the investment of points you have to put into them. Like, they brought the Arcanist back from 4. And what they do is they attack all enemies at once. They put a field down that can give them status ailments and binds. And then you could add some passive skills that, for as long as that field was down, it would heal your party or give you a defense boost or something. And in this particular game, I think you've only got to invest 6 points in the passive heal to max it out. So I don't remember what it was in 4, but it was probably 10 in that game.
Yeah.
8 or 10. I remember there were a lot of skills that went to 8 in that game. They did a good job, though. I would go through the character classes. Like one of the one character class that has me confused, the Imperial. Now, I believe they were an extra character in 4, an unlockable character. And their deal was that they had some kind of overdrive weapon. And they would use their skills and they would overheat so they couldn't use it again. But then they got a bunch of skills that would cool down their weapon.
Okay.
And when they could use it, it was really powerful. And when they couldn't, they would have passive skills, like as long as you're overheated, you have a high defense or something.
Yeah.
It was a pretty nice mechanic, but in this game, the first overheat skill you can actually use costs 20 technique points, and I think you start with 40.
Oh.
So you can use it once, and then you overheat for 7 turns, and then you've got a couple of skills that reduce that number that you can use in the meantime. But they're expensive too, so I didn't look through all of the skills of that character. I'm assuming that later on they either get a huge technique point boost or they get some kind of way to knock down that cost.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like it's a character that is really useful to start the game with.
Possibly.
I had one in the party for a while. I mean, they're fully armored, so at the very least you can use them to attack, but again, you don't have any passive attack boosting skills.
Right. But hypothetically, if you had a protector in the front, you could use back guard to protect the back rank, and then you have the heavily armored protector and the Imperial in the front, and then everybody in the back with AoEs or something like that.
Yeah, that's always a possibility. So it would keep your front line safe to have that extra armor. And there's actually not that many characters that can use full armor in the front. I think it's just those two and maybe the princes. yeah, that is my take on the new Etrian Nexus. I love it. And
It's an Etrian game.
they've got some of the classic music back, some of the classic dungeons. You run into the I think the first classic dungeon you run into is the lush woodlands from 4. So it's everything that you would want out of an Etrian game if you're a fan, and it wouldn't be a bad starting point for anyone that wants to dive into the series. I mean, you can basically start with any of them, but I would certainly recommend starting with one of the 3DS ones first.
Yeah.
Because the first 3 are kind of complicated and a lot harder to get used to the system if you haven't played that kind of game.
Well, I mean, yeah, dungeon crawlers are kind of an acquired taste.
Yeah.
They usually have a pretty sharp learning curve, but once you get it, you're kind of good.
And they worked a lot of the kinks out of any problems.
Etrian 1 was a lot more streamlined than any of the early wizardries or anything like that. So
yeah, it was. But once you hit 4, you've streamlined it even further. They worked out a lot of the kinks.
Yeah, that's true.
And they show you how to do everything fairly early in that game without holding your hand for too long.
Yeah. Etrian 4 is definitely really good.
3 and 4 are probably my favorite. 4 was really good. It was. It was like. 4 was a complete remodel of the series, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had 3D. They had the 3DS, right? So, the remakes of 1 and 2 are actually, if you're coming from like a JRPG direction, you might want to start with one of the remakes because they're very.
You'll be.
They're a little softer,
And you'll be invested in the story.
They have a little bit more story, yeah.